Hello guys, Dama.82 here. I thought I would wrap up the campaign here. Just wanted to show you guys some of my favorite builds, and towards the end of the video I'm going to give you some of my final thoughts on a few things. So yeah, let's get to the unit showcasing. Wanted to go over our first unit that we spawned in to be used offensively, and that's the Metal Ripper. I think you guys remember this one from the very start of the campaign. It is actually one of my favorite craft of the whole campaign. Had lots of fun with this. So let's just look at the stats here real quick. Was fast enough for the Deepwater Guard, but beyond that, it didn't really. It couldn't really hold its own, unfortunately. But it was very, very cheap. The APS that was used in it was very powerful for what it was intended for. Just shrink the block so I could show you guys. I believe it was a 333 Hesh. Very, very simple APS that I made for this. I'll be honest, anyone could have made this. Just had the time and patience to do it. Here's the shell for it. Yeah, not a whole lot to it. Very, very compact, as you can see. I thought the gun was very, very effective. Considering this thing was originally intended to fight the Onyx Watch and the Ashes of the Empire campaign, and did so well in this one, I think is really a credit to its adaptability. Also, I think I might have seen this take out a few aircraft on its own with the autocannons here that I've mounted. One of the things that you guys may not have known is this thing actually had landing gear that it deployed from a spin block, and it was hidden with mimics, and whenever it got to a certain altitude, those landing gear would drop. Basically, the landing gear itself was a mimic on the end of a rubber beam, so that way it looked like the wheels were touching the ground, and it would actually get this thing to stop. These pipes really are just more or less for decorative purposes. I thought it made it look a little more aggressive with the exhaust pipes coming out where they did. Very, very simple engine. Don't know if you could get away with engine designs like this in current version, but who knows, maybe. I think this probably could be reworked to working current without too much fuss. Just have to try to get a decent shell to come out of this thing. Probably be like maybe a hollow point frag or something like that. But yeah, overall, very good plane. And I think I really loved the shape that this thing came out in. I was trying to go for something like a high performance World War II fighter bomber. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Alright, now we have an aircraft that has been very instrumental in my victory in From the Depths. This is the Hammer High Bomber. And it's pretty fast, and it flies at extremely high altitude. I think it's about, I want to say maybe 2,000-3,000 meters. Yeah. So basically, this thing has just been damn near impossible for about everyone to shoot down. It basically circles in orbit and just drops complete crap tons of EMP frag bombs that are radar guided. Thing though is with the radar guidance, you can use the radar decoys to basically negate the threat of these, but there's only like maybe one faction in All-Meter that did this, and that was the, who was it? Steel Striders. But yeah, not really a whole hell of a lot to these. But they just completely chewed up capital ships like everywhere, and it was extremely useful against the Great Talons too. It did very well against them. It did have a couple of decoy deployers back here just to try to keep missiles off it. I don't think there's really been too many instances where this thing has even gotten hit. And the only time I've actually seen it get damaged very much was when it was I yeah, they collided with each other. That's what happened. Took me a bit to remember how that happened. Yeah, just tons and tons of ammo, and ammo processors, and it just basically spams the hell out of those bombs. Does a very good job at it. Gave it just a little bit of shielding, not really a whole lot, just for like time frag shells and things like that. But it's held its own surprisingly well, and it's been very instrumental in taking out surface targets. Alright, well, let's move on to the next one. And next up, we have the Master of the Wind airship. This thing, I can't think of enough good things to say about it. Um, it it did extremely well leading the charge, probably from midway towards the end of the game. Probably wouldn't have done very good against the Scarlet Dawn because their stuff just moves so fast, and this is a forward-facing unit, and I seriously doubt it had the turning capacity to be able to keep up with the Scarlet Dawn crap circling it and beating the crap out of it. So yeah. So one of the most distinctive parts of this is the gun here in the nose. Now, reason being is it's not an offensive weapon. It's a defensive weapon. And by that I mean, if you look at this back here, just nothing but autoloaders. And these fire timed flak rounds at 500 millimeter. And it would do it controlled via a ACB, which is right here. And it took a lot of finagling to get this cannon to work correctly, but basically what would happen is when a missile got to just the right distance, this would just spew out timed flak rounds and utterly destroy pretty much every missile that came in. It had no problem with it taking out like small and medium missiles. It did very well with those. It struggled a bit against the large missiles that I came across that the Grey Talons were using. I believe also Steel Striders had a couple of units that used them, but this was a very, very good system that I actually used from another design from a previous playthrough. The idea originally came from a fellow YouTuber by the name of Defend, and it's called an aerial denial system. And basically anything that flies out into the front of this is basically going to get shot to pieces by this APS system. But yeah, there's like no AI control of this whatsoever. It's just this ACB firing this gun. Just make huge clouds of flak and just kill all the missiles that happen to fly near it. Except the main problem with this weapon is that it only can be used in a very small area, which of course would be the front of the ship, so right about here. To the left and right side, it's probably not going to do a whole hell of a lot. But since this thing was designed to be facing towards its enemies all the time, it actually did pretty well. Originally, this craft did not have these huge banks of thrusters like this right here. It's just meant to look like a big turbine, meant to give it a like forward and backwards motion. That did some interesting things with these Diddy blades, spinning in opposite directions just to make it look more interesting. Want to make it look like there was some kind of a shaft coming out to power them. I thought it made for a pretty cool look. Down here, just got some of the 3x3 thrusters just to kind of give it just a little more redundancy. This one in the middle, it doesn't really do a whole hell of a lot, just kind of there to look nice, but it does give it just a little bit more redundancy. And this is the infamous 200 millimeter spam gun that I've used for so many of my crafts. It's just that effective, and I've been very, very happy with it. I think this version uses Hesh, and it still hits a pretty significant fire rate. So yeah, you got a little over 200 rounds a minute coming out of this single turret. So yeah, I believe it fires a mixed shell type, one just like pure Hesh, and the other one actually uses tracers, but it's only designed for getting like up close and personal. We have a couple of these anti-aircraft octuple 40 millimeter Bofors on top, like 4 of them, mostly just for looks. And we got some pretty significant cram cannons here, like a 1800 millimeter, give or take. Not really a whole hell of a lot to them either. They're just like hull mounted. That's one of the good things about hull mounted weapons. They take a hole at less. I'm sorry, a hole at less room than something like a turreted weapon would actually take up. We have a couple of the, I think they're the Behemoth engines that I slightly modified to make them a little bit longer. They provided the power. There's the shell for the flat gun on the front. And I have a special smoke round that came out of these hull-mounted APS weapons on the left and right, basically just to try to nullify enemy LAM systems a bit. That was pretty much their whole purpose in life. And out on the far ends, we have the 8-meter 500 millimeter shells. You had to have some insanely long noodle barrels to try to make these things accurate without rail assistance. Crazy. Oh, and I'm sure you guys have noticed, but I got like a bunch of Man of War cover or album art on this all over the place. So yeah, really, really love Man of War. Good stuff. This is one of the types of shells that gets shot out of one of the 8-meter cannons. It is a hollow point, high explosive, inertial fused, and I believe it also fires a very large Hesh heat shell. I just have like one of these firing the Hesh heat and the other one firing the hollow point. Tons and tons of Deady Blades all over on the inside of this thing. Added some more engines here to the back. And I think I did some pretty cool stuff here with the engines here on the back, just trying to add more thrust to it. In older versions of FTD, you could just like use jet controllers that kind of give you a really cool flame effect. You can't do that in the current version anymore, though, I'm afraid. But I think I like how this bank of thrusters back here turned out. So yeah, that is the Man of War. I mean, I'm sorry, not Man of War. The Master of the Wind. I forgot to mention this laser down here. This thing has done wonders, especially against like the Grey Talons because they spam so many freaking nuke drones, and this thing just gladly just zaps them out of the sky. Yeah, this thing ended up being quite the powerhouse against several different factions towards the end of the game. There's the laser turret up there. Didn't really have a very good field of fire, but didn't really need it. And mostly it was just designed to take out really small flyers, which it did pretty good at. So anyway, yeah, that's Master of the Wind airship. Alright, next up we have one of the major heavy hitters of the whole campaign, the Kingdom Come missile cruiser. Named for a Man of War song, Kingdom Come has got tons and tons of missiles. It's even cheaper than the Shirayama missile cruiser. It moves a little bit faster. The anti-missile protection seems to even be better on this. We got the twin, or I'm sorry, not twin, but the single barrel 400mm belt blaster timed flak COPPA guns here in the front and back. Did a very, very good job of intercepting torpedoes and missiles. Though one thing that I would have liked is, I don't know if this is a thing in current version or not, but I wish the local weapons controllers for COPPAs would be capable of discerning between like missiles and torpedoes. I don't know if that ever became a thing or not. But anyway, over here, probably notice that there's like this hatch down here. This is actually where Rambot would have like his own little command center down here. Had a hell of a time trying to get this little staircase that'd come up here to the top. I spent quite a while on that. These big old missiles down here, mostly HE. I think there's about, yeah, there's 8 of them. 4 on each side. Not really a whole lot to them, though I think in later stages of the game I traded out one of these explosive warheads for turning thrusters so they could hit Scarlet Dawn targets a little bit better. I think this, yeah, it was about the time that I started fighting the Grey Talons that I came up with this new cruiser. Originally, it was intended for fighting the Lightning Hoods because they have some very, very fast flyers, and I made some particularly nasty missiles that were very good at intercepting them. It was usually the Tachyon that was giving me the most grief, and that thing, since I ran into it the first time, it's just always been a huge pain in the ass to shoot down. The turning thruster in these active radar missiles did wonders against the Tachyons and other very fast Lightning Hoods craft. Believe there's also a couple of Rizzle's missiles here in the back. Just always a good all-round anti-everything weapon. Did very, very well throughout the whole campaign. This up here, these are single pixel IR seeker missiles. Just meant to go after very, very fast targets. Have them on this 2-axis turret here. The turret got blown off an awful lot, sadly, even though I tried reinforcing some of the parts of it with heavy armor. And these laser turrets here, with the simple lasers, they did pretty good. Just trying to do damage as aircraft flew over the top. Had some of these octuple barreled 40mm Bofors turrets. The bridge, I think the bridge turned out pretty nice looking, actually. And the hull that this craft it was made from is actually the exact same hull that I used to make the Bannockburn class with. Very, very happy with this design, and this is probably one of the major workhorses of the whole campaign, at least halfway through it ended up being. Up until that point, it was the Shirayama that was holding that spot, but I needed more of a dedicated missile boat, so yeah, that's basically the role this ended up filling. We have some torpedo interceptors. I use this design on a lot of my anti-torpedo interceptors. Just some standard uh, downward launch torpedoes here, closer towards the front. Got some props to the front and back and middle here, just to keep it afloat. Try to control the roll and the pitch. It's a very, very good craft. I was very, very happy with it. Alright, moving on to the next one. Next up, we have here the Richthofen, named for Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. Also inspired by a Sabaton song by the same name, the Red Baron. This is probably one of my favorite builds of all time that I have done. And it's been probably one of the funnest aircraft that I've ever had in a campaign. I know it's got kind of a cartoony look to it, but it's actually quite the powerhouse, surprisingly. I've seen like maybe squadrons of about 5 of these completely neutralize all the weapons on the top side of a perforator. It could be pretty scary. I think I did pretty good for the price tag on this thing. So yeah, having several of these is fairly easy to do. It's not very fast, but it doesn't really need to be. It's just got so much missiles. It just, well, let me show you. Now these segments here, the front was hidden by a mimic. Same thing with these lower bits down here, but it has all of these EMP frag missiles. Made it to where they just shredded anything on top of ships. Knocked out their weapons, knocked out their sensors. All kinds of nasty work was done by this thing. Had a hell of a time trying to get all of this crap just to fit in this one little area here. Did some mimic work to hide the jet thrusters that helped keep it aloft. I even got some larger ones here on the side that I did some mimicry to kind of hide there. This little elevator down here between the landing gear, that's a mimic as well. This is probably one of the few craft that I really, really went to town with on mimics. And again, all the tailplanes that are hidden with, once again, mimics. But yeah, the barrage of the missiles on this thing just, it made it a very powerful combatant. Even managed to get the little decal up here, the Iron Cross, which I thought looked very, very good. It took a little bit of work to get the shape right. Again, used the same trick with the Mimic to put a 360 camera, try to make this thing look like it's got some kind of a point on the nose there. Engine, pretty simple, not really a whole lot to it. I liked how the exhaust pipes ended up on it. I thought that looked pretty good. I think I actually came up with this thing before I came up with a lot of the other aircraft I ended up using for the campaign. This has been another design that has done extremely well on the workshop, and a lot of people are big fans of it. Heitzmeister included. He's gotten a lot of fun out of this thing as well. 30mm assault cannons weren't really meant to do a whole lot, just make it look like it was just blanketing an area with DACA, make the strafing runs look a little cooler. But the meat and potatoes, as far as the damage goes, were these radar missiles that it just loved to spam. It was fairly vulnerable. It got shot down fairly easily, but you get off a couple of volleys of these missiles, and you're gonna really give someone a bad day. But yeah, probably one of my favorite builds in this whole campaign, and a lot of people have been getting a lot of use out of it, so that just makes it even more rewarding. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we have the Last Man Standing submarine. Bit pricey, but for what it does well. Max speed at 21 meters a second. It is kind of tricky to get submarines to go this speed underwater. One problem that I had a lot with it is that I never really got to solving was it rolls like crazy to the left and right whenever it makes a turn, but other than that, it works just fine. We had to completely strip the blocks away because, as you could see there, the entire outside of it was composed of rubber. For a very good reason, as I stated earlier, anyone who has built a submarine in From the Depths knows that submarines are probably more vulnerable to the terrain than anything else the enemy can throw at them. Also, this is where I first started experimenting with remote guided thumperhead torpedoes. And I got to tell you, these things are freaking amazing. Probably didn't need the one turn on there, but I don't know. You can basically configure these torpedoes to do about anything you would need them to. So yeah, no big deal. There were times where I switched them out to just regular torpedo sonar style torpedoes, and yeah, there's a lot of versatility in them actually. You can just set them up for whatever type of enemy that you're up against, and you could. I mean, you guys seen me do it in combat a few times. These missiles, or I'm sorry, torpedoes, are just meant to, well, just give the submarine just a little bit more oomph. I'm not entirely sure why I had the. Oh, yeah, signal processors for some reason. I thought those were the remote guidance systems. But yeah, the signal processors are just supposed to make them more accurate against craft that used sonar decoys. There are like several Steel Strider designs that make pretty heavy use out of the sonar decoys. That's one of the reasons why I designed a system like this with a remote guided thumperhead torpedoes. These things just laugh at a LAM system, and it doesn't care about decoys. It doesn't really care much about anything, as a matter of fact, which is what made them so great. And this right here is where all of the sensor data would come in. And I wanted to basically put enough of the processors so that this thing can be converted over to like just regular torpedoes, and you could still convert them back over to using remote guidance whenever you wanted. So that's why all the signal processors in here. Got some very, very good torpedo interceptors in here that are launched out of the left and right sides. One of the issues that I had a lot with this when I added this system here is that they kept coming back and colliding with the submarine. So I had to put a lot of ejectors on to make sure that they got tossed out far enough to where they wouldn't be as big an issue for the submarine anymore. That's just the ACB that controls the system. Back here in the rear, we have Razul's patent pending anti-everything missiles. And we launch the sonar buoys and some radar buoys for targets above the surface. I had two separate AIs for this thing. One was for navigation and firing the torpedoes. The other one was mainly geared for anti-aircraft weapons, which was basically this bank of missiles here. Used some Deady Blades here in the back to get more speed out of it. Had this sonar decoy that popped out the back here. Basically, the way this was designed is this would be launched when a torpedo was detected fairly far out and would try to drag it off course. If it continued to get closer to the submarine itself, then it would start kicking out these torpedo interceptors. Again, never really did manage to get really good control of the roll stability, but a lot of submarines will actually list to the left or right from what I've seen in real life, so I just was like, okay, whatever. It does have some fairly light shielding, just to try to keep APS from being too big of a problem, because sometimes it will find it. But yeah, these aren't very, very strong shields at all, just to try to keep the rubber from being knocked off all the time. The great thing about rubber is not only does it protect you against collision damage from underwater terrain, but it also lowers your sonar signature. And got some of the PIDs that we use to control the submarine here. I think I had these control blocks set to change the depth here depending on certain circumstances, what I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, use some downward facing props here to control depth. And also had some turning props to help it turn a little bit tighter. This submarine has actually been probably the most popular item right now that I have currently in the workshop. A lot of people have been very, very happy with it, and I think 100K for a submarine that could damage, well, not just damage, but cripple or even kill a tier, which is probably about 7 or 8 times the cost of this thing. I think it's worth it. So, anyway, let's move on to the next design. Okay, guys, so the next item I wanted to add in this little review of ships that I'm doing post-campaign here is the All Guns Blazing Dreadnought. Basically, I put this guy to use against white flares, and it did very, very well against them. It's probably one of the more cram-heavy vessels in my fleet. And the interesting caveat about this thing is it has no shields and no lamps. The armor, it's pretty thick for a ship of its size. We have one layer of metal, another layer of metal, stone, more metal, heavy armor, and a wood spall liner. At least that's where the armor is at its thickest part. Now on these cram cannons, they're about 1800 millimeter, yeah, and they are pen depth crams. Very, very nasty crams. I used a Wellner's cram cannon fortress to be able to build these, and they did exceedingly well. This thing can solo a perforator and win fairly easily. I mean, gets a couple of these cram shots in it, and perforator is done. And we got the smaller kind of case-mated crams that I made. They probably weren't nearly as effective as the original main guns are. They are like 1500 millimeter, and they use timed frag. Probably not as nearly as good as the pen depth HE. If I would have gone back and changed it, I probably would have just done full on high explosive, maybe inertial or timed fuse. But yeah, I thought they looked kind of cool though, just kind of like hanging off of every corner of the ship here. Gave this thing a pretty mean broadside too. This was also one of the first designs that I really went to town on using the simple weapons on. The simple weapons did okay against small craft. So yeah, we had that. I probably would have done the arrangement of these a little bit differently now, come to think about it. But it still fits the look fairly well. Uh, Anti-aircraft was probably pretty poor for this thing because all we had were these 3.7-inch guns. And I'm guessing that they probably used timed flak. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're timed flak now that I think about it. The twin casemate guns, I believe I had them set up for Hesh. And we have some of the interceptor missiles, and down here a little bit farther down we have the torpedo interceptors. We also got a torpedo launcher down here in the bottom. If I can remember where I put the damn thing. Yeah, there it is. Pretty much the same standard torpedoes that I use for about everything. So yeah, just to give it some anti-submarine capability, or if something managed to sink below the surface where the crams wouldn't stand a chance of hitting them. So yeah, I'd actually recommend to a lot of people that for every build that they make for the campaign, put some kind of torpedo launcher on it, unless it's an aircraft. And I put a lot of work into these masts up here, where all the detection equipment's hanging off of it, and made it look like a bit of a crow's nest with cameras and the telescopes and all that. I thought they turned out pretty good. I think Heitzmeister said that this is one of his favorite designs. Pretty proud of it, not gonna lie. So yeah, that is the all guns blazing Dreadnought battleship. Alright, now let's take a look at the Man of War airship. Just so you guys can see what stats it's got. Fairly decent on speed, very, very expensive, but as you guys saw towards the end of the campaign, trying to find materials was not hard to do. I think I ended the campaign with nearly, 10 million mats? Something like that. Anyway, probably one of the more larger units that I made for this campaign. I think Heitzmeister said he wanted to take a look at this at some point. I also did this in a like a building series where I did a time-lapse build with it. So let's have a look at these missiles up front here. Some very, very nasty, well, just kind of anti-everything missiles. Surprisingly, the faction that this was designed for, the Scarlet Dawn, they didn't really seem to have much in the way of radar decoys. So yeah, just pretty much went with radar everything. Over here we got some Rizzles missiles. They did very, very well. Just a big bank of turning thrusters here. Over here, this is like a big. I tried to make it look like a casemate gun. Pretty much all I did was I took a mimic of a steam boiler and just blew it up to this crazy ass size that you see here. And it's just like 12 barrel APS turret that uses, I think it's 100 millimeter heat rounds. Yes. They're okay. I mean, I know I probably could have gone with belt fed auto loaders and they would have done a hell of a lot better, but really, I need something that would have some potential to get through shielding and armor, so that's why I went with these. A lot of people out there probably would have just used like cash or something like that, but it did okay. Now with these a couple 40mm anti-aircraft guns that you see down here, I actually put them on a single pull of heavy armor, and I gave them local weapon controllers for both anti-missile and regular local weapon controllers. And these things actually did somewhat decent at shooting down incoming enemy missiles. Now up here on this deck, we kind of did the same thing, except we used just the regular local weapons controller. And I know I ripped these off the Megalodon, but they actually did somewhat decent. I really liked the look of them, and I needed something to kind of fill in the space to make it look like something was actually going on here. And we got the Sea-Wiz guns from the, I believe it was the Kingdom Come missile cruiser. Yeah, that's what we ended up using. They did pretty good work, actually. Shot down a hell of a lot of missiles. And I was trying to make the back of this look like it was the rear end of a very large turbine or something. That's kind of the look that I was trying to achieve here. I think I did okay. Though I think I probably could have done some spin block fuckery to make it look a little bit better. So let's just remove the structural blocks here for a moment so we can have a look at the insides. This airship actually uses 4 of the engines that I use for the Corollas Rex Mark II. It has lots of ammo storage for those big missiles up front. We also have a torpedo launcher right here, the very large torpedoes. We also have like some more conventional torpedoes up here. Just basic, well, they're a little elongated, but yet explosive EMP is what I went with on these. And tons of Deddy blades. That was one of the great things about this ship, is that it's able to pull itself out of the water from like actually being in the water. A lot of airships, they can't pull themselves up after they hit the water, especially the Scarlet Dawn, I've noticed. I think the, who is it? The Grey Talons have a nasty habit of that too. Lots of LAMS nodes in here. I think there's like 8 in total. And lots of smoke deployers. Because a lot of the Scarlet Dawn use lasers. And I went and I named all the AI systems after band members from Man of War. Great stuff if you guys never tried listening to Man of War. They've actually, if you listen to European heavy metal and then listen to Man of War, you can definitely tell there's a lot of influence there from them. So down here we have the offensive laser for the Man of War airship. Probably one of the more powerful lasers that I developed. Yeah, 200 AP, and it does crazy amounts of damage. I think it's like on a 4-second delay is what I have the firing pieces set up as, to where it'll give more powerful shots because the cavities will be better charged. And this thing just, well, you guys have seen it in the campaign, it just completely shreds any type of armor out there. It don't care. And another one of those octuple 40mm anti-aircraft guns here at the top, just for some flavor. I think it turned out pretty well, and it did extremely well in the campaign. I was very happy with it overall. So yeah, that is the Man of War laser airship. Alright, so next up we have the Shirayama missile cruiser. Probably one of the more unique hulls that I've done for this Let's Play. The Heitzmeister was very adamant in his admiration for the style hull that I chose for this. He actually helped with some of the construction of the ship itself. He came up with the COPPA guns that are on the front and back. I believe he also developed the missiles, or at least the large ones that came out of the back here. I added these two somewhat after the fact later on. We also got a bank of those fancy Rizal missiles that I love so much. And we have these, I believe, 146mm flat guns. They've done okay. You could always do better, though. Anyways, got a bunch of the 90. Is it like 93 or 97mm guns? But anyway, yeah, these are just more flat guns. I just put them on the deck to try to make the ship look more interesting, like there is a bit more going on. They all work just fine. Same sensor mast as I've been using for a lot of my designs. I did the same trick with the spin block and a mimic of the large boiler to try to get this shape. And we have a 100mm anti-aircraft turret. Could have probably made this fire a hell of a lot faster. I got this thing with the belt-fed autoloaders that they take forever to reload once the ammo runs dry. Yes, you can get insane amounts of firepower out of them, but I hate the reloads like a lot. So I try to do like a kind of a balance between the belt-fed autoloaders and regular autoloaders. At least that was the purpose here. It was a bit tricky to try to balance all that, but I believe these are just mainly using flak. I think I also installed a COPPA controller on this. Why the hell do I have all these? Whatever. I just realized that I had more than one local weapons controller for this setup. I think I might have intended one of those to be a COPPA. Anyway, it did okay. It was a decent enough weapon for the time. And this probably was a bit of a controversial decision by some of you out there who are watching this. I'm sure you're probably not going to agree with how I ended up doing this bit here. Just keep in mind in 2.4.9, when the ammo boxes that are like a 1x2 or 2x2, they don't blow up as catastrophically as the single ones. So these have like a single layer of metal armor to protect the ammo stores from the actual missiles themselves. Yes, the ammo stockpile could go up completely and I lose a bunch of ammo, but usually like one layer of metal was enough to try to keep the explosion contained. So that's why it was done like that. I don't quite remember a lot about this, to be honest, because I haven't had a chance to look at this design in quite some time because I've moved on to the Kingdom Come, which was a direct replacement for this. Had some pretty good anti-aircraft missiles, as I recall. Yeah, this thing was just meant to do straight up damage, and it exceeded very well when it was going up against, what was it, the Onyx Watch. Did extremely well against the Onyx Watch designs. Matter of fact, I think this thing could have soloed the whole faction and probably have done just fine. So here's some torpedoes down here that Heitzmeister added to this. Quite a talented guy. I've been really enjoying working with him on several projects that we've been collaborating on. And these are battery systems that are for the railguns. The Siwa's gun at the front and back are both rail assisted, as well as this larger twin mounted cannon here in the middle. This one right here, it fires 200 millimeter by 2 meter Hesh rounds at an extremely high rate of fire. So yeah, this thing hits about 300 RPM. Oh no, I'm sorry, it hits 165.8 RPM. It does probably about 320 rounds a minute with both barrels or with both firing pieces combined. I believe Ashaya, he's the one that worked on the bridge, did some very interesting things with it. This was actually done over a stream, and was done with the help of a few other people. It was Ashaya, I believe, and Heitzmeister, Brick, aka Lauren, and even Benzo to some extent. Of course, he kind of just put chairs all over the damn thing, but that's another story for another time. Overall, it did pretty well up until I came up with the Kingdom Come. This was a very, very effective ship, and I was very happy with it. And just so you guys can have another look at the statistics here. 17 meters a second is kind of on the slow side, but I may do. That's the material cost isn't really that bad. Once you get like 2 or 3 of these going, you can raffle stump a lot of other factions. Anyway, it was a great collab build with a lot of the guys from the Discord, and I haven't heard from a couple of them in a while, so if you guys happen to see this, drop me a line, let me know how you're doing. Alright, so I think we're done with this, so let's move on to the next design, shall we? Next up, we have the Corollas Rex Mark II battleship. Just a little under 1 million materials. This thing has just been effective against about any goddamn thing in the campaign. It's got the it's a pretty hefty boat here. It's 31 meters wide, 202 meters long, 52 meters high. Some crazy volume. And I was able to get it to go about maybe 25, 26 meters a second using this trick back here with all the propellers. Up front, we have a Siwa's gun, the same one that Heitzmeister developed. And here on the rear, we have another Siwa's gun that we kind of co-authored together, me and Heitzmeister. It is the gun that is used in the Whiplash flak tank. It did its job as a Siwa's admirably. Not nearly as good as the one in the front. It didn't have near as much rate of fire. But yeah, it held its own fairly well. So the main guns here, these are all rail assisted 8mm, 500mm guns. I believe I built these on camera when I was recording a series of building the entire battleship itself. 30 rate, or I'm sorry, a fire rate of about 30-ish RPM. Took a while to get these guns balanced where they had about the same reload time. So this thing will probably put out, about 90 rounds a minute. And then you multiply that by 4, yeah, gets a little crazy. There's not really too much difference between the mains on the lower level and the upper level. They just have their necks stretched out. They fire a combination of Hesh Heat and Hollow Point high explosive frag. I think I might have even added like a smoke module on the back of the shell just to try to nullify enemy LAM systems. One of the problems that I had developing this is that with 8-meter shells, you really have to have a hell of a noodle barrel for it. And as I keep telling you guys, I hate noodle barrels. So I usually kind of go with a bullpup design where I have the firing pieces recessed into the back of the turret a bit. The fronts of the turret, they kind of have like a bit of a spall liner. And these are probably some of the most heavily shielded turrets that I have ever made. Normally I just like maybe use 1 or 2 shields. This one has 3. One to protect from plunging fire and the other one's to just protect the front of the turret. But it's got some pretty thick armor for the front of the turret. And that's pretty much the only place where it's needed. It's been pretty rare that an entire turret's been taken out in the campaign, so pretty happy about that. I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 instances that happened. The secondary guns, they are twin 200mm turrets. And at 60 RPM for something, or yes, 62 RPM, I apologize, for something about this size and something that's just pure autoloaders, I think I did pretty well on it. They're protected by about 3 meters of metal. I could also see these working potentially very well as maybe like main guns for a destroyer. But I don't really know how much of this stuff would be viable in the current version. The laser, now that thing did some amazing work throughout the whole campaign. This was meant just to keep small flyers off of us, and it did that job very well. Oh, I'd have to strip the Bluxway so I could show you guys how powerful it is. So right down here in the bow of the ship, that's basically where the entire laser system is positioned. Let's see here. There's the multi-purpose laser. It's a slow charging single Q laser, if I remember correctly. That's not too bad a damage per shot there. Want to make sure it had a really high AP. This is actually fairly compact. It might do well in a much smaller ship that was more heavily laser dependent. Get some Daddy Blades here to just try to increase this ship's ability to turn a bit. I did the same thing with, well, a lot of other ships I made for this campaign. I couldn't think of anyone specifically because I did that a lot. These are just some anti-aircraft missiles. They're purely for mostly shooting down planes. They can do well against ships, but these are especially maneuverable to try to catch planes. And we got about maybe, oh gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 LAM systems in this. I usually like to go with a decentralized LAMs because they just seem more efficient, because you would be draining and recharging power from one centralized LAM for like just only one side of the ship that anything that you're trying to shoot down with the LAMs would be approaching from. So it just made more sense to me to only give power to LAMs that protected one certain side of the ship instead of all at once, if that makes sense. There's the rear Seaways turret. This is probably one of the more compact turrets I've ever made. The engine was a recommendation by one of the Discord members' existence. Very, very fine shipbuilder himself. He does like to do different styles of the Yamato in a lot of his builds. This is just kind of where the AIs are located. I have them all named after members of Sabaton. I did catch some flack over the way I positioned this ammo, but honestly, like I keep saying, in this version of From the Depths, if this stuff gets touched off, it's only going to blow out all the ammo in its own separate compartment. It's not going to wreck the rest of the ship like some people seem to think it would. Of course, we got torpedo launchers. I believe I have some that are sonar guided and some others that are remote guided. Oh, and these Daddy Blades, I don't really have any engine power going to them. They're just supposed to help the ship get a little more oomph. Actually, it can work fairly fine without them. I just thought I could probably use it to try to give the ship a better turning rate. There's one of the main gun shells right here. And yes, I was right. They do have a smoke module in them. The other shell type was one that Matey actually helped me with. Yeah, the hollow point here. That thing did some crazy damage. Just thumping the hell out of everything. Of course, the ship is too heavy to float on its own. So we got a bunch of these downward-facing props to try to keep her afloat. And it's got some fairly thick armor. Got a layer of metal here against the engine. Then we have these alloy beams. Then we got a wood spall liner, alloy, heavy armor, metal, and that's pretty much it. It's been pretty rare that this thing has had its armor punctured in any significant way. So yeah, I've been very happy with it. It has like several different engines. Basically, the same trick that I mentioned earlier is just to have the larger engines shut off when out of combat, and these smaller, more efficient engines to run when it's out of combat, just to try to save fuel. Got a bank of Resol's anti-everything missiles here up towards the front. And we got quad layer stacked shielding. Got butterfly configuration. Do have some of these anti-aircraft guns mounted on the deck here. They're mostly just for show, if I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I put some on top of the turrets as well. They do okay against light flyers, but towards the late game, they're probably not that decent anymore. And that's my cat saying hello. Say hello, Deuce. Anyway, yeah, I was pretty satisfied with this design. And I think I first started using it against the think it was the lightning hoods that first faced its wrath. We also got some anti-torpedo launchers here. Got it towards the front and back, and we got some sonar down there to look for them. Iron Mark III, he actually came up with this secondary tower up here. It makes some pretty cool looking stuff, gotta admit. Just like some little 50 caliber machine guns, just add a little more flavor. But yeah, been very happy with the design. So let's move on to the next one. And lastly, I wanted to go over what I consider to be one of the stars of the show, the Primo Victoria heavy cruiser. Comes up about half the price as the battleship. Moves at a pretty good speed, 20 meters a second. That's actually pretty awesome, yeah. Up front, it has missile interceptors. This thing does not have a COS at all, and these missile interceptors have been doing some amazing work. I didn't really have much room left to put a COS on this thing. This is also the prototype ship for my Lamb's node system that I ended up using for the rest of the fleet. And yes, I did do that trick again where I basically dumped a bunch of props behind some mimics and had these huge steam props put back on there to try to make it look a little nicer. It also has a rudder here on a spin block. Sorry. The rudder, for the most part, is kind of, well, it's just meant to look like a rudder, and I figure putting some props on it would probably help with the turning on this ship. So the secondary guns, just so you can have a look here, just 1 meter long squash head shells. They did pretty well for what they were designed for. This thing has a rate of fire of 54.8. And these, we got like one stacked on top of each other. It's kind of like a step here, where one can super fire over the top of another. Then we have these flat guns. I believe they're the same ones that I used on the Shirayama missile cruiser. I was also experimenting with some painting methods, so that's why a lot of this is turquoise. The ammo stores, they really didn't get touched off all that much. It was kind of rare, but sometimes a laser would get in there, and I fortunately had enough armor protection to keep it from blowing the whole side of the ship out. But I was very, very happy with this design, and it ended up doing extremely well in the campaign. The anti-air wasn't as great as I would have liked it to have been, but as just a all-round heavy slugging warship, I think it did extremely well. The main guns here, they have two different types of shells actually. And they got actually a pretty decent rate of fire at 27 or I'm sorry, 25.7 RPM, 25.5, 25.7. That's not bad. I actually took these turrets from a different ship that I made a while back. That was a battle cruiser, and basically modified them for this version. So yeah, it uses a squash with an emergency ejection fuse and a base bleeder, and it also uses a hollow point head with the HE warheads. So yeah, this thing did excel pretty well at doing some heavy block damage and internal damage. And it's got like 12 of these main guns on it. The only real anti-air that this thing has, though, is probably these 146 mil flat guns and this little anti-aircraft turret from the Midway that I put on here. The lamp system did pretty well. And, well, whenever I find something that's extremely good, I just copy it and put it in everything else. And it's a very, very tough ship, too. I don't think I've ever seen it sink either. But the armoring, it's pretty thick, as I recall. And it is capable of floating on its own. The sorry, not the rudders, but the propellers that you saw on the bottom were mainly just to control roll. So we got like 1, 2, 3 layers of metal, 4 layers of metal, 5 layers of metal here for the main belt. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Oh, that I forgot the outside layer of its alloy. That's just to give it a little bit more buoyancy. But yeah, when you combine the metal with alloy, it makes for some pretty good armor because it's very, very strong and very buoyant. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this little review of my campaign craft. So I just want to wrap things up here with some final thoughts on some things that I've been wanting to share with you guys. I've had a few good reasons for doing this campaign, the way I did it and why I did it. I wanted to show that what this game could be like if played by someone who had a bit of know-how and experience, which I'm sorry to say is seriously lacking on a lot of YouTube channels. Off the top of my head, there are only a handful of YouTubers who even get to the late game content, let alone finish the Quest for Neater campaign. Most of them stop after the Deepwater Guard. One in particular cried watching the lambs of the Onyx warships take out his clamshells mid-flight. I also wanted to prove that the game was viable and enjoyable before all the nerfing and hack job rebalancing. If the bugs were dealt with and if the campaign craft were better maintained, where they worked as intended, I firmly believe that if they released the game a year ago, it would have done well. I'd like to think that in finishing my campaign, I was able to demonstrate that I was a very capable and proficient builder. I'd hope that would prove that I just wasn't another noob on YouTube that didn't know what the hell they were talking about. Now that I feel that I've established that I'm an experienced and skilled player, I want to challenge some of the changes that have been made in the last year. Firstly, APS was not overpowered. I showed you that shields and lands, when used effectively, can nullify the dreaded 500mm APS shell spam. Also, shields were not overpowered as well. With a bit of skill, anyone can defeat any defensive system, even shields. So, instead of whining to the devs about the game being too hard, I learned and adapted. With a bit of time and patience, every ship and weapon system that I developed could have been built by anyone watching this. For me, the answer to making the game more accessible is by making information more accessible for the game and not dumbing it down across the board by removing options and systems that the developers no longer find convenient. Anyways, with all that said, guys, I'm glad that there's a lot of you out there that enjoyed watching the campaign and following along with me. It really does mean a lot to me that people actually appreciate a lot of the hard work that I put into doing this. I'm probably going to be doing a special video for tomorrow, which is going to be the official release day. So yeah, be looking out for that. So I'd like to thank you guys for watching. This has been Dama.82, and this has been the Dama Does From the Depths Quest for Neater, the finale. And y'all have yourselves a hell of a day, and keep your hammer high. Later.